Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, robots and automation geeks everywhere. This is the Automation Academy's Mastering the Machine webinar for the 14th of June, 2025. And this is the 87th webinar uh, that I have held over about the last 4 years. And today's topic is going to be B&R PLCs and a little bit on PLC platform comparisons and an update of some of the things that I'm up to, including a new podcast and all the automation stuff that I have acquired over the last few months and what I am doing with it. I think I've mentioned this before. So, what is the Automation Academy? The Automation Academy is a subscription-based website where you can learn all kinds of fun things. We have training videos for Allen Bradley, Siemens, Beckhoff, Omron, some other smaller platforms, kind of a video here or there. We do have job and aptitude assistance, figure out what you want to do in the automation field or another field, maybe related to automation, maybe not. How to get into systems integration and some of the things that you need to know in addition to PLC programming and HMI programming and all that good stuff. We do have a library of training and technical documents, including some free software, which is very useful. Somebody the other day was asking if I had Omron software, and I do. I have full CX1 licensed software on the Automation Academy site, and it can be downloaded from there. It can also be downloaded for one other place that I can tell you if you contact me directly, and you can get a free CX1 license from there. We do have a community with interest groups, IO Central, different topics there like different PLC platforms or regional information, things like that. And we do have these regular events, Mastering the Machine webinars, about once a month. For the last few years anyway, it's been once a month. I did a few of them even more recent than that. I think I did them once a week when I first started, but we're down to once a month now. And you can find all this information at all these various websites. More on where the name Mastering the Machine itself came from a little bit later, but you will find a download. It's about a 12-year-old document that I put out that explains a little bit of where I first used that name. I think some stockbroker also used the name a long time ago, but other than that, I think I'm the main guy that uses this term, which again will matter a little bit later. As I mentioned, there are a lot of other things you need to know in addition to PLCs and HMIs, which PLC and HMI trainings all over the internet, all over the web, free stuff, paid stuff, whatever. But all this other information you need to know also. If you're working in industry, you may know all of these already. I know a little bit about probably all of this. I know less about things like ERP and MES because I don't work in a plant. I really never have worked in a plant at any high level, so I didn't know what all this stuff was. But I do deal with it in my day-to-day, sometimes down at American Beverage Depot, things like that. AI, new topic here, right? That's big in the last couple of years. Machine learning. So lots of things that you need to know besides PLC training, and you can see a list of all that here. So today's topic, where did this come from? Well, I took an online class, again, attached to American Beverage Depot. They're the ones who bought a machine that has a B&R controller on it. It is a shrink wrapper. I've talked about that particular wrapper here in the past. It was using like a Siemens PCS7 from the 1990s era and had some Leroy Summers servo drives, which are kind of knockoffs of Control Techniques. And we we looked into what it would take to rebuild that machine ourselves and put something like Allen Bradley or Siemens, something like that on it. And it just became too difficult. So Juan Pablo at American Beverage Depot probably spent at least $500,000, if not more, on a new shrink wrapper. I don't know what the final cost was. Maybe I'll get that information later. But part of that was they gave training for 2 people at his plant. They said, we will train you in BNR if you will use BNR on this machine. I think that's probably their standard. I believe this company was maybe European, and BNR is big in Europe. So this is the culmination of that. We got this class, and Juan Pablo himself was supposed to be in the class, but ended up running off to Argentina for a few weeks during the class. So he was unable to make it, and he put his engineer Andres. Andres is awesome. Andres Mancia from Argentina. He and I have worked together in the past, and you can see some little pictures of us here in our training. We did about, I want to say it was 6 or 7 hours a day with time out for lunch. And our trainer was a guy named Josh Dresner out of Atlanta. He's an employee of BNR, kind of has a little bit of a systems integration background himself. And any questions we had outside of what he could answer in the class, he did get answers for us and things like that. But I'm going to kind of present a little bit about what we learned. I am not an expert on BNR just because I've taken this class. I think I've mentioned that before. I teach PLC classes around the country. And I do usually a 4-day class in something like Allen Bradley. I teach both beginning and advanced classes for a Canadian company there. And I do teach my own custom classes. And I always tell students, especially if you're new and you don't know anything about PLC programming, just because you have taken this class is not going to make you a programmer. It's going to take years, I would say, to become good at it, and at least a year or more to just even really get familiar with it. There's a lot in the software, and Allen Bradley probably is the easiest software to learn. It's maybe the most user-friendly. I think Siemens pretty easy too. But something like this, I'll explain a little bit of the complication part of BNR and why some people say it's one of the harder platforms to learn. I'll explain why that is a little bit in this webinar. But this is the demo that we use. They shipped this to us in a big old case. And not shown here are some of the cables, right? There was an Ethernet cable that went from this drive, and this drive will run both of these motors, and it goes from here to a specific port on this little PLC. This is the BNR PLC, and then this is the I/O attached to the BNR PLC, which can also be it's usually to the right of the processor. This whole thing is the power supply, processor, and the communication ports are down here. So you have like USB ports and 2 Ethernet ports, and I'm sure some way of connecting RS-232 or serial. But this is the trainer that they ship. And then they have some switches and pilot lights, little potentiometer here. So very typical of what I use in PLC classes, right? Allen Bradley or Siemens classes. I've built my own Beckhoff trainers. I think you can see something like that maybe behind me here. So anyway, that's the trainer. This was one of the presentations in the class. And this class was a very beginning maintenance level class. Nothing very complicated. We really didn't get much into programming because it's only a 3-day class. So like a lot of the vendor-specific classes, they spent the first couple hours just explaining what all B&R is as a company, what kind of things they have. And I believe this next slide has some of that. They use a lot of special names here, like this ACOPOS, which I think POS is position, and I don't know what ACO is, but there's a lot of buzzwords and acronyms and things like that attached with this. They are an Austrian company founded in 1979. So I have a list of all the PLC companies that came out when they came out and things, and Siemens was in the 70s, Allen Bradley was in the 70s, some of the Japanese companies. And my guess is when B&R came out, it was probably focused pretty heavily on motion control and had some simple logic associated with it too, but that was where People were, servos were starting to appear in the 70s. They weren't anywhere near as mature as they are now. But that's my guess as to why they were started. I didn't find a lot of information online about, their early history or anything. But anyway, founded in 1979, the name itself, and I assume B and R stands for somebody's names in Austria. They were bought by the ABB Group. You may have heard of ABB, not AB, right? This is AC Brown Boveri, is I believe their acronym, and that was bought in 2017. So they're part of a much larger group, just like Allen Bradley is part of Rockwell. So their products include PLCs and controllers, HMIs, industrial computers. I don't know if they make them themselves, but they do use industrial computers for various things. They have machine vision. I haven't seen any of it. They have I/O systems like this thing off to the right. In other words, you can use this I/O structure with any PLC, just like you can, say, Beckhoff or some I/O link, IFM effector, things like that. You can mix and match your I/O system and drive it with something like Ethernet IP or EtherCAT or whatever, just like kind of Beckhoff stuff. Mechatronics and motion control. I would say from everything I've ever heard about B&R, that is their main focus, and they're supposed to be very, very good at it. Now, I will say what I've seen, right, like this little demo here, this is just a little track-based system. There are a couple of other companies that do almost this exact same thing. I'm going to mention probably Bosch and Beckhoff that do this sort of thing. And there's some other companies that concentrate more on the mechanical end of it. And then these little Acopause, I think these are called 6D, because like the Beckhoff units, they levitate these little pallets around on a table, and they can spin them and they can rock them and move them in 6 dimensions. So I think that's probably what this picture here is, showing all the different directions you can move things, spin things, whatever. And then this is a big old track-based system, right? These move around the outside of the track. And I saw a demo from Bosch that is very, very similar to this. So I don't know who came up with it first. They didn't tell me that, but this was part of our first day's material. The software itself, how to say this in a good way. I'm going to drag this software over here and just show you a little bit. It does all these IEC languages to some degree. They mention C and C++. They did not say they have Python on board, but there are ways, because this is sort of a computer, to take a Python app and somehow put it on the PLC. But they don't push that, right? You would have to be connected to these libraries and things. But anyway, here's a quick look at the software itself, dragging this over. So this is the left side where you would typically see, the organizer in something like an Allen Bradley PLC or a Siemens PLC. All these things here, right? Lots of libraries, variable tables, data types. These are global data types. So I would say these are like UDTs, right? And then I don't know if these were built by Bosch themselves. And then there's a global I/O structure. My guess is this one's a canned one, IOTYP, output structure. So UDTs probably include some bools and some whatevers. You can see this one. I brought this up. This is an axis control variable, and you can see some of these data types here, like unsigned integer, long real. These are pretty normal, but then a lot of these other ones I think are canned. And again, I only did 3 days, so I didn't get into great detail here, but you can. I'm not even sure exactly what the reference is. It's probably a linking mechanism of some kind where you can link one variable to another. You can make something a constant, right? And then you can't change it. It's a fixed number. Or you can make it retentive. So this is assignable retentive, which would affect how much memory you use. If you power down, of course, you come back up, and if it's not retentive, you lose whatever value is in there. That's the general idea. And then this replicable, my guess is you can copy it. And then you see some variable values and things like that in here. I am not online with this. So this is the evaluation license. You get 90 days when you start. I don't remember great detail of exactly how I got the license installed on here, but it was part of the class. And I signed up for the class, and then I asked for the license, and eventually it got sent to me. So I don't think you can just go to their website, download the software, and say, I'm sure if you email them or say why you want to use it. So they're a little bit proprietary from that standpoint. That's what I've found about B&R so far. Proprietary, a little bit closed. So this is just a kind of a general look. Various online settings. You can see some TCP/IP here. You can see a trace. I don't think the trace is up because I'm not connected to a servo. Little bit of structured text, which is the main language that you would program this in. There is some ladder. Let me see if I can see any of this. So I'm not real used to this. This is what they call their ladder. One of the things I found with the ladder, they said no one-shot in the ladder. So if you were used to programming in ladder and you needed to do something that required a one-shot, you're in trouble. You can't use that. So, interesting platform. I would just say it's a little more, it's a lot more complex than, say, Allen Bradley or Siemens. And then it's even more complex than, say, a Beckhoff type thing. And in the case of ladder, more limited. This is your typical, function block, and I'm hovering over it, getting a tooltip here. I'm seeing a variety of things that somebody built this block, and it's an axis block similar to something you might find in Allen Bradley or Siemens, right? Special purpose block. And you can see commands and velocities, positions, all the things you would normally see in this. What I don't know, because again, I only have 3 days of experience with this, is this a canned block, right? Or is this built by somebody that just programmed this? My guess is a canned block, and that it's maybe part of a lot of these libraries. So this is the complex thing. This is what makes something like a Beckhoff or a B&R controller more complex than an Allen Bradley or a Siemens controller, because you're really getting down into the operating system and using these libraries, right? There's a whole lot of things in here. This one, here's a FUN, my guess is function, right? Type would be a data type, and VAR would be a variable. Some of the names that they use for things in here are different. This is their structure of their programs. And these are not programs. That's not what they're called. They're called tasks. And that's a different thing than what you would call a task in, say, Allen Bradley or Siemens, or even in Beckhoff. So a lot of these terms that they use, I think, are very specific to B&R. That's what I've found. And so that's another thing that makes it a little more complex. This is not Codesys. I was hoping that it would be, but it is not. Because Codesys, of course, there's, I think, 500 manufacturers that use Codesys, so you can find a lot of help online. Here, what they said is there is a forum, and they, of course, people come on the forum and may answer questions. They supposedly have a pretty active forum. I would say they need to be active because there's not a lot of other help. Not as common as Beckhoff, not as widely used as certainly Siemens, Allen Bradley, Modicon, all that. And I'll do a little more on comparison at the end. The software is called Automation Studio, and it includes everything. So all your motion control is done in here, all of your PLC stuff, all your I/O configuration, all your HMI work is done in here. They have something called Map View down here. You can't really see it, but we popped up little screens. Sort of like Visues in Beckhoff. I've covered that a little bit before, except maybe not as user-friendly. You couldn't peel the tab out and make it a separate HMI like you can in Beckhoff, which I think is a cool feature in Beckhoff. You can grab the tab, pull it out, and it's a little floating HMI. You can either change screens on it and everything. So this does not do that. There's the trend I was talking about, right? Or a trace. They call it a trace. So this was just a little servo trace, and it wasn't active at the time, but we did run the servos, right? There's the trainer again. It's the one we used. And we ran these a little bit. But in a 3-day class, and also Andres speaks very little English. He's mostly Spanish, and Josh didn't speak Spanish at all. So I did a little interpretation back and forth with Andres. Um, so IEC 61131-3 languages. However, like I said, no one shot in the ladder. Um, don't know if there's instruction list. I don't think so. Behind the scenes, there usually is. Usually what you do is you turn your ladder and your structured text and things into machine code, and an intermediate step of that is instruction list, usually. They did have CFC, which is continuous function charts. I like those. Those are used in Beckhoff in Code Assist. Gary Pratt's book, the Book of Code Assist, mentions about why you should like CFCs, and I do like them. I think they're very useful. There is a built-in simulator, ARSim, all part of this Automation Studio package. The built-in HMI map view. I will say map is used as an acronym for a lot of different things. Here's some of the technology screens they had. Like I said, tasks, trends, the trends they called traces. There is an alarm, function in here. So built-in alarms, kind of like maybe Alan Bradley stuff. These were, they didn't even call them routines, but that's effectively what they were. And then they went through how they scan, and it is a fixed scan. So this is why they call them tasks. They will assign a time to the task, and you can have some tolerance. You can go longer than whatever that was. So say you set this to 20 milliseconds, and it runs 23 milliseconds over because you put too much code in there. That's okay, right? If you don't use up all that time, you will have something called idle time, and I think they do the equivalent of, what would you call it, housekeeping, right? That's done in the scan. I've explained some of that before, and then it will run it again. So these are all timed, and I think you can have up to 10 of these timed tasks, and you can assign separate times to all of them, and they are going to run at this fixed value. And if they overlap very, very much, you're going to get those watchdog timer issues. That, to me, is problematic. You really have to manage that stuff. So these are all, you could set one task at 1 second and another one at 20 milliseconds and another one at 100 milliseconds and make them do what you want. But I don't know how this warning happens. I just know that if you exceed this, they said it will shut the program down. No longer scanning, no longer running. So another thing that makes it complex. I did a lot of Beckhoff work in the last few years, and we had diagrams like this where it would go out to the I/O and then go out from the I/O to a drive and make a loop and come back on the same cables. That is EtherCAT. This is not EtherCAT, and I don't even remember the name of the protocol that they use, but it's yet another proprietary Ethernet protocol. It is not Profinet. It is not Ethernet IP. It's not EtherCAT. It's something else proprietary to BNR. So lots of proprietary stuff. Lots of libraries. So the scanning's different. The communications are different. The protocols are different. The languages are, IEC languages, but abbreviated. And then use C and C++, not Python, not Java, none of that. Lots of libraries, other files. So in 3 days, that's kind of what I got out of it. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so time for a little bit of comparison. And I just threw a bunch of PLCs out here. These are all things that I have some experience with, less experience on some than others. I have almost no experience on IDEC. I see it all the time, but really haven't touched it. Bosch also went to a really nice Control X demo, so I've seen Bosch quite a bit, and the software looks like good stuff. Looked fairly user-friendly, and is Code Assist. So I know Code Assist fairly well. I know Beckhoff fairly well, so I'm familiar with it, right? I can get by. So comparison. I'm going to, you know, say the followings are my opinion, should not be taken as engineering advice. Do not buy any of these brands based on what Frank says, right? I can help you with that if that's important to you, but that's not what this is meant to be. And if my bias shows a little bit here, we're doing these comparisons. It's a bias I had even before taking this B&R class a little bit. So Alan Bradley, you know, probably the most user-friendly software there is, but very, very expensive. And the thing, Alan Bradley, I've mentioned this before, is the worst at is communications, right? Nobody wants to do DeviceNet. Ethernet IP is great, but DeviceNet, ControlNet, all that stuff, remote I/O, all that's old, and that's not Alan Bradley's forte. But they do have nice software, very expensive software, very expensive hardware. Siemens, less expensive. Less expensive hardware, less expensive software, less proprietary, not as mean as Alan Bradley. They're still part of their own evil empire, I suppose. But, uh, you know, I like Siemens. I've done several projects recently with it, like TIA Portal, but I'm very comfortable with Step 7. I've taught it for a long time, so very comfortable with everything from statement list. That's their version of instruction list. There is no equivalent of that I saw in B&R. And you really don't use instruction list in Alan Bradley. You can double click a rung and it'll bring up the text equivalent, but not the thing. Schneider Modicon, again, I don't have a ton of experience with newer Modicon, and I think this is a 384 or something. This is not modern. But Schneider's reputation is a little more complex. Sometimes you get into some byte-based stuff like you used to in the older Siemens. But in general, they have a tag-based platform, just like all these are tag-based programs. So Automation Direct, tag-based. They have a Productivity 2000 that's proprietary, but they have a Codesys version of this. And I have that, and I kind of like it so far. And again, cost is low, and software is free. So big fan of that. Back off. Software is free. However, there is a license, and this is the way B&R works. You have to have a runtime license on the PLC, and then you have to have a engineering license on your laptop, and also maybe a runtime license on your laptop if you're going to use it, certainly to drive I/O or any of that. So two different licenses to deal with, part of what makes Beckhoff a little bit complicated. And the Codesys stuff, you have to have a Codesys runtime on the PLC, but I think if you buy, for instance, this processor from Automation Direct, you're going to get the license with it automatically. Beckhoff, not so much. I have 3 of these, and one of them has no license. I bought the processor, and it came with no license on it. But it runs for 7 days. So it'll run uninterrupted for 7 days, and then you have to just type in some letters. Omron, user-friendly. As I mentioned, I can get you free software for this, CX1, which is not the newest. They have Sysmax Studio. It is not free, right? There is no free version that I know of. IDEC, don't know anything about their software. They're advertising classes everywhere, probably inexpensive. Bosch, saw the Control-X demo. It is half proprietary. So it is Codesys, but they have their own name on it. Like Phoenix PLC Next has something called PLC Engineer that is not, it's Codesys, but it's kind of hidden behind their own front end. GE, don't know a ton about GE. Used to do a lot of work with old GE and Mitsubishi, but since they've gone tag-based, I have not worked much with it other than bringing it online with Ignition. So comparison, if I had to say, what is this most similar to? What is B&R most similar to? I would say most similar to Beckhoff, but even more complex. And it's partially because of all the libraries and partially because it is not Codesys based. Beckhoff TwinCat 2 was Codesys, and then TwinCat 3 looks a lot like Codesys. So if you know Codesys, you can also do Beckhoff. I would not say that with B&R. If you know Codesys, it may help you a little bit, but it's going to be much more proprietary. How about these little guys? You know, I have one of these. This is my Pi Plates Raspberry Pi, and you can put Codesys on this. And this is way cheap. And you would still have to use a very small runtime here. But with Pi Plates and with the expansion capability, a lot of folks are using Raspberry Pi or Arduino-based systems for microcontrollers and things. So this is your lowest cost option. And you can see this one's open and all kind of 5-volt stuff transported to these cool little hats that are 24 volt or even up to 240. Jerry Wassinger of Pi Plates makes these. Microcontrollers, PCs, different from B&R, but certainly no more complex. B&R's the most complex of all these that I've seen. PLC Next, I've worked with a little bit. I like it. But like I said, it's Codesys, but is hidden behind their own front end and is a little different. So hardware is different. Some of the layout is different than your typical Codesys. And then Opto22, we had a good presentation on this. I don't think this was on my webinar, but I saw a lot of how the Groove stuff works. Liked it pretty well. It was Codesys, and it also did things like Node-RED. So the B&R doesn't do anything like that. Like I said, I don't think you can put, Node-RED or Java or Python or anything on there, even though it is sort of a computer. That's one of the things I figured out. It's a computer. It may even run a Windows-based something like Windows CE, but you'll never see it. And you're not going to put Microsoft Office on there, right? Like you could in Beckhoff. You could put Office on here or some abbreviated version, right? Because it really is an IPC. B&R is not an IPC, but sure acts like it, right? With all these libraries and things like that. So that's a little bit of the comparison, okay? So let me see if anybody's on here. I see a couple people. If there are any questions, I'm going to open up the chat, see if anybody said anything. No questions yet. So if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. You can either open up your mic or you can type something in. Be happy to try to answer it. Like I said, this was a 3-day class. I had to take it because I have to help support this machine. Andres is the guy who's on the front line. He's in Miami. He's really got to support it. I don't have to support it as much, but I am sort of their remote plant engineer down there in Miami. So I have to know something about it, and we'll learn more as I go. What else? Okay, so about my used stuff. I have a lot of used stuff here. PLC 5s, slicks, device net stuff, control net stuff, all Allen Bradley. And all this stuff showed up at my shop about 3 months ago. And I didn't know what to do with it. This is Automation Training's equipment, but I have, permission to sell it all, and it's probably worth a lot, but it's all really old. Cool trainers. I've talked about this in the past. Lots of old Micrologics and slicks and you name it, right? So what am I doing with it? I am building a building next to my shop. That was them pouring the slab. The slab is in now, and the building will go up next Thursday. While I was at it, I had crush run poured on this driveway. I have more equipment in this shed, and this whole room is my fab shop. It's all full, and my training room that I'm in right now is all full, just of stuff after stuff after stuff. So I've mentioned this before, not exactly sure what to do with it except sell it, maybe build some of it into trainers, maybe play with the PLC 5s. I even have a bunch of laptops that I'll be selling with licenses on them. The old licenses, right? But even Control Logics, RS Logics 5000 is on there. It's just old versions, like maybe up to version 16. And that's it, because this was old stuff. L55 Control Logics processors. Lots of stuff. I think I have 15 PLC 5s and at least 10 slicks, chassis, but they're all 504, so old stuff. So that's what I'm doing about that. That building will be going in, and then I get to move all the stuff out of my shop and sell it or build stuff out of it or whatever. What else? Guess what? I'm starting a podcast. I'm using professional help to do this, It will also be called Mastering the Machine, but it's mostly audio, right? So there will be, I'll put it on YouTube, but it is mostly something you can listen to in your car. So I won't be showing lots of pictures and videos, 20 to 40 minutes long, released every week. And I'm getting professional help for the first 5. What is the difference between a podcast and a webinar? Podcasts have an RSS feed and people can subscribe, and then they can drive their car to another city and listen to podcasts the whole way, which is what I do. I love Tim Ferriss. I listen to a lot of his stuff. Always cool guests and talks about fun stuff, and I can get lost in it while I'm driving. They're going to do a nice press release for me. I may have to do a newsletter to keep people engaged, may have to make a separate web page, maybe even a separate site, but probably not. Don't know where I'm going to host it yet. I'm trying to get Tim Wilburn to be my first guest. He's dealt with him in the past. He spoke at OT Skatacon last year, and I've interviewed him on this podcast or this webinar before. So trying to get him and Amber to be my first guest out of those 5 episodes. And these are the 2 cover art options they gave. I chose this one. It's a little fluffy looking. This one's, got a robot hand on it. This one's got a fake robot and a microphone. I thought it was cool. And this looks like a fish. I thought this would make a cool coffee cup. So anyway, that's where I'm at on all this stuff. Yeah, if you have any comments, questions, whatever, lots of ways to contact me. Of course, LinkedIn. Have a big Facebook group that's nearly useless, has 9,000 members, and all they do is spam and try to sell to each other. And I have to now permit every comment on there. But sometimes they put cool robot videos on there, so I allow those. And so more people join, but it's about useless. So probably don't try to contact me there. But LinkedIn, my YouTube channel. Oh, big thing, right? Hey, YouTube. I want to say Automatici, but now it's Automation LLC. I believe it's at Automation LLC, which makes more sense than this. And you can find me at my website, automationllc.com. We do have the Automation Academy. I've explained all that many times. Next webinar, July 12th, 2025. Don't know what the topic will be. This is in between my trip to Seattle and a trip to Houston for OT Skatacon. So maybe I'll cover OT Skatacon. Maybe, I don't know what I'll cover. Maybe I'll talk about the podcast, which will release the week after OT Skatacon. So the last week of July, the first episode will drop. It will be weekly after that. And then I'm going to frantically have to come up with more episodes. It's going to be on me after they help me with the first 5. And then I got to do it myself. But anyway, so that's what's up with me. Tell me what's up with you. Check this out if you're on YouTube. Please give it a subscribe and a like and all that good stuff. It does help. I monitor all that and trying to get some publicity and connect with people as much as possible. It just leads to more business. You know what I may talk about now that I think about it? Next webinar, I am maybe about to connect. I'm going on my first trip with How to Robot. And How to Robot is an interesting company. They are Danish, and they go in and they do plant evaluations and, give suggestions and hook people up with vendors, do a workshop where they explain how everything works. And I'm going to certainly do a podcast with them after I get my podcast going, but may do, a webinar with one of the CEOs. They have co-CEOs, both named Soren. So may get one of the Sorens to come on and explain what How to Robot is. It's pretty cool. And I'm, maybe doing some work for them. I'm going to Michigan and actually it's next week, a week after this week. Going to Kentucky this week and then going to Michigan a week after this. So that's really it for me. Thanks to those of you who showed up. Again, if you're on YouTube, give it a like, give it a subscribe. We got over 500 subscribers this week on YouTube. That's a good thing. Getting some consistent views on there, but trying to figure out what to do with all that because I don't make money on any of those things. So I make money by doing jobs, right? But marketing and all that stuff's important. So We'll see you all next time, and thanks for showing up for those who are here, and thanks for giving a subscribe and a like on YouTube. And we'll see you all later.